So many different aspects of this. What has become a massive price tag for this war as the economy in the United States suffers and so much is left unattended to. What does this all break down to? In Urbana, Illinois, Robert Naiman is standing by. He's the policy director for Just Foreign Policy. And Robert, I want to start where many others have left off. The cost of war. $375 billion and counting. What have we got for that?
Well, we haven't gotten much. If the goal is increased security for Americans, as your report indicated, the majority of Americans don't think the war is worth it, don't think that the war is protecting Americans. So, and spending more money isn't likely to produce any other result. We've already seen in the last few days that the 16 U.S. intelligence agencies, their consensus document, the National Intelligence Estimates, have given a very different picture than the White House's rosy Afghanistan review. They don't see progress, they see constancy, and there's no reason to expect anything different from the future. There's no reason to expect any difference in the behavior of the Pakistani government based on their perceptions of their core national security interests. Nobody in Washington has come up with a story of how that's going to change. So what we have to look forward to is $120 billion a year, at least, over the next couple of years for this continued policy of war, unless there's a fundamental change in U.S. policy.
And I think it's fair to point out, I mean, this is not a purchase that President Obama made. It's simply one for which he's in charge of paying. But today we heard words like progress, goals, strategy in place. You know, on one hand, we have President Obama saying certain areas that were once dominated by the Taliban no longer are. But in fact, other areas that weren't before controlled by Taliban now are. So I guess my question to you is about the message. Is it fair for the president to say that progress is being made?
Well, it's inaccurate. It's misleading for the president to say progress has been made. I do think he purchased this policy. He didn't start the war, that's true. But more Americans have been killed in Afghanistan since President Obama took office in January 2009 than in the entire U.S. war going back to 2001. So he has purchased this policy. This is his policy. And to claim progress is fundamentally misleading. It contradicts the assessment of the 16 national intelligence agencies that don't see meaningful progress. I mean, the point of progress is, are you changing the situation, or are we in a quagmire? There's no evidence that the quagmire has changed or that it will change anytime in the foreseeable future.
And Robert, I want to talk about some of the discussion that's being held around this war. Just today, I don't know if you saw, but we showed pictures right down the street from us. Our studios is really close to the White House. Pretty respectable people here in D.C., people that we've had on our shows several times, handcuffing themselves, chaining themselves to the White House. We also have it, and I don't know when something like this has happened before, but the International Committee of the Red Cross, an organization that really seeks to stay out of the public eye, that really just helps. The Red Cross has been in Afghanistan for 30 years, and we heard them this week speaking out against Afghanistan, speaking out against the security there, saying it's deteriorated to its worst point since the overthrow of the Taliban 9 years ago. What do you think it says to have, you know, these people chaining themselves to the White House, to have the Red Cross speaking out? What does this all say?
Well, first, the Red Cross report. That's incredibly damning, as was noted in the press. And as you said, the Red Cross isn't always holding press conferences about the situation. This was a unique day. And they said that it's the worst that it's been since the war started, and they're having the worst problems in access to reaching people that they've had in 30 years of being in Afghanistan. So this totally contradicts the happy message that the White House is putting out. It's very devastating. People are protesting at the White House. Of course, people have been protesting all over the country for some time. As you noted, there's some prominent people at the White House today. Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers, a whistleblower on Vietnam, who's been in the news recently because of the WikiLeaks case. You know, some U.S. officials like Senator Durbin have tried to say, oh, you know, Julian Assange, Bradley Manning, WikiLeaks, this is nothing like the Pentagon Papers. This is nothing like Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg is still around, and he says the opposite, that this is very much the kind of thing that we need. And if we had had a Bradley Manning before the war in Iraq, maybe that war wouldn't have happened. You know, people in Washington, like Senator Durbin, like former Ambassador Joe Wilson, knew that the case for war was fraudulent, and they didn't speak up. Senator Durbin said in April 2007, I knew the case for war was bogus. I was on the Senate Intelligence Committee in 2002, but I couldn't say anything because I was sworn to secrecy. Joe Wilson, in July 2003, wrote his op-ed in the New York Times saying, you know, the president's speech, State of the Union speech, that was bogus. I knew it was bogus. Well, what if he'd written that in January of 2003? See, that's the question that WikiLeaks raises. They're trying to make it easier for U.S. government officials who have this kind of information to get it out to the public. That, I think, is what explains the hysterical reaction of the U.S. government. It's not about WikiLeaks. It's about intimidating U.S. government officials by stigmatizing WikiLeaks. So if they have this kind of information, they'll make the choice that Senator Durbin made in 2003 or Joe Wilson made in 2003, not to speak out.
Perhaps
So
pretty interesting, too, that, you know, Joe Wilson speaking out. I mean, maybe more people should have questioned when his wife was then outed, Valerie Plame, that, you know, why are people so mad? Why are they going to break the law and out his wife? There's got to be something deeper here with all these discussions.
And this is what it is. They wanted to set an example. Just, you know, why has Bradley Manning been in solitary confinement for 7 months, even though he's been convicted of no crime? As Glenn Greenwald pointed out, you know, many countries consider this kind of solitary confinement to be a form of torture. And why is this guy being treated this way? Because they're trying to set an example. Don't do this. They're trying to set an example for other U.S. government officials that have access to this kind of information.
Unfortunately, Robert, we are out of time. We could talk about this for hours, I'm sure. Robert Naiman, Policy Director at Just Foreign Policy.